Mornings in Willowbrook have a softness to them, like the whole town breathes slower than the rest of the world. The maple trees along Maplewood Drive hold the first blush of autumn, and on the far end of that quiet street sits a small white house with green shutters and a porch swing that still creaks just the way it used to. That's my house. I'm Margaret Ellis, 79 years old, and I've lived here for over 5 decades. People say it's too big for a woman living alone, but they don't understand. It's not just a house, it's a memory archive. My late husband, George, built the shelves in the living room by hand. You can still see his pencil markings along the edge. The front step squeaks, a sound I once found annoying but now, strangely, brings comfort. He always said he'd fix it next weekend. Then one rainy Tuesday, his heart simply stopped. And that step has squeaked ever since. Now it's just me and the birds and the sun filtering through lace curtains. Every morning I brew tea, water the plants, and talk to George like he's still here. Maybe that's crazy. But silence grows heavy when no one says your name. My children, Brian and Rachel, live nearby. Rachel visits once a month, usually with groceries and her phone in hand. Brian stops by more often, but only when he needs something. A signature, a check, a favor. He always says, "I'll make it up to you, Mom." He never does. Only Noah, my grandson, shows up with nothing to ask. Just stories, smiles, and a craving for my blueberry pie. I bake one every Wednesday, though I don't eat sugar anymore. But for Noah, I do. Because when he's here, I feel remembered. That Wednesday, I heard the front gate creak. His footsteps, gentle, familiar, made the porch boards groan like they used to under George's boots. I smiled before he even knocked. Then he said something so simple, so casual, that it unraveled everything. And if you think this is just a soft little story about pie, old age, and quiet mornings, stay with me. Because what came next cracked open decades of silence and shattered the one thing I thought I could still count on. "Still warm," I said, placing the pie in front of Noah. He smiled the way George used to, like joy wasn't something you chased, but something you brought with you. "You always remember," he said, eyes lighting up. "I never forget Wednesdays," I replied, pouring tea into the porcelain cups I only used when he visited. "So, how's campus life treating you?" He launched into a story about a math professor who finally remembered his name, a roommate who burned microwave popcorn twice in one night, and a girl named Hannah who liked old poetry and didn't mock him for quoting Dickinson. I smiled, nodding, listening, but somewhere between his laughter and my stirring spoon, something inside me stirred too. He was halfway through his second slice when he looked up and asked, "So, what are you wearing to the anniversary dinner on Friday?" I froze, spoon midair. "Dinner?" He blinked, confused. "Dad said he was picking you up." 35 years, right? Private room at the Orchard? I shook my head. No one told me about any dinner. His face fell. "Oh, I just assumed. He mentioned it in passing last week. I thought—" "It's all right, sweetheart," I interrupted gently. "Probably a mix-up." But it wasn't all right, and it wasn't a mix-up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight cut sharp across the hardwood floor, and every creak of the house felt like a question I couldn't answer. I sat in my armchair, holding a worn photo of George on the day we moved in. The fireplace behind him, paint still drying on the walls. He had that look in his eye, the one that said, "You and me against the world." The phone rang the next afternoon. Brian. I answered with the most natural cheer I could summon. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice a little too upbeat. "Quick heads up, we're canceling Friday night. Claire's under the weather." "Doctor says rest and fluids." "Oh no," I said. "Do you need anything? Soup?" "I can drop some—" No, he cut in quickly. "We're covered. Just wanted you to know." And then he hung up. Just like that. My hand stayed on the receiver long after the dial tone faded. My heart didn't race, but something in my chest tightened like a rope quietly pulled. Why cancel if he hadn't even told me it was happening? Why did Noah believe I was invited? Why the rush, the over-cheerful tone? I called Rachel that evening. She picked up distracted. "Claire sick?" I asked softly. "Claire?" she repeated. Yeah, I guess. I haven't talked to her today." "You're still going Friday?" A pause, too long. "Oh, yeah, sure." Her voice stumbled over the syllables like they were rocks in her throat. She hung up before I could say goodbye. The walls of the house, usually filled with the quiet comfort of routine, suddenly felt hollow. Not just empty, but deliberately vacated. Something wasn't right. Something was being kept from me. And if I wanted the truth, I'd have to stop waiting for someone to tell me. I'd have to go find it myself. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. No alarm, no birdsong. Just a weight in my chest, and the undeniable sense that something was being hidden. Not misplaced, not forgotten. Hidden. I didn't feel angry, not yet. What I felt was colder than that. Something slower, like frost spreading over a pond. A quiet realization that perhaps the truth was never meant to reach me. I needed to clear my head. I told myself I was going to the market for groceries, but I walked there empty-handed, coat buttoned up tight, more armor than comfort. The air in Willowbrook smelled like pine and damp leaves. As I passed the bloomery, our town's little flower shop, I heard someone call my name. "Margaret?" It was Sue Hartley, Rachel's childhood friend and now part-time florist. She stepped out with a bouquet of lilies in one hand and a hopeful smile. "Big night tomorrow, huh?" I paused. "Big night?" "Rachel said you were all getting together for the anniversary dinner. 35 years! That's incredible!" My breath caught. "Oh, I thought it was canceled." Sue tilted her head, confused. "Canceled? That's strange." "I've had the reservation on my books for over a week, the Orchard's private hall. Rachel even took the evening off." My hands trembled slightly, but I nodded. "Of course." Must have been a mix-up. We exchanged polite words, but I don't remember any of them. I walked home slowly, the pavement feeling less like ground and more like glass beneath my feet, so they hadn't canceled. They had lied, not by omission, not accidentally. Deliberately, and not just one of them, all of them. Even Rachel, who used to sneak into my bed during thunderstorms, now avoided eye contact through phone lines. Back home, I sat in the kitchen. The kettle whistled. I didn't move to stop it. I just sat there, let it scream. After a while, I pulled down the old photo album. My hands knew exactly where to turn. The page with George holding Brian as a baby, Rachel on her first tricycle, me in the background, young and tired but smiling. Birthdays. Lake trips, Christmas mornings full of laughter and wrapping paper and chaos. When had that laughter turned into polite obligation? When had I become a checkbox on someone's weekly planner? I closed the album slowly, set it on the table like it was fragile. Maybe I was. That night, I stood in front of my closet longer than I meant to. I touched the navy blue dress I hadn't worn since George's funeral. Simple, dignified, still fit, though my shoulders had grown sharper with time. I laid it out on the bed. If they didn't want me there, I needed to understand why. I wasn't going to ask permission. I was going to see the truth with my own eyes. Don't go anywhere. What you've heard so far, that's just the surface. The next chapter isn't about secrets anymore. It's about what happens when the one they tried to leave behind walks right into the middle of the room. And when I say things got quiet, I mean dangerously quiet. Friday evening arrived wrapped in gray clouds, the kind that made the whole town feel smaller, quieter, like something was about to happen, but the trees hadn't decided whether to whisper or warn. I stood at my bedroom window for a long time, holding a cup of tea gone cold. The dress hung on the back of the door, the navy blue one, George's funeral. My last act of dignity, now pressed and waiting for a new occasion, one they hadn't invited me to. At 4:55 p.m., I picked up the phone and called a cab. The driver was young, tattoos up his forearm, earbuds in. He didn't say much when I gave him the address. The Orchard, private dining entrance. He glanced at me in the mirror. Swanky place. Special occasion, I said, my voice like glass. He didn't ask more questions. When we pulled up, I asked him to stop just before the main entrance. "Wait here," I said, "just in case I need to leave quickly." He nodded, thumb tapping his steering wheel. The Orchard stood tall and dressed for the occasion. Brick and ivy, twinkling lights in the windows, valet boys in pressed vests. I didn't go in the front. I took the long way, down the gravel side path, toward the guest parking lot. I counted the cars before I even saw them. Brian's silver SUV, Rachel's beige sedan, Noah's rust-dusted hatchback, even Claire's sleek hybrid with the chipped bumper, all here. All parked, no mistake. My breath caught, but not from pain. From confirmation. I kept walking until I reached the banquet hall windows. The curtains were drawn, but just enough light slipped through. I stepped closer, slowly, the way one approaches the edge of something sacred or dangerous. And there they were. A round table. White tablecloth, champagne flutes catching the overhead glow, Brian mid-toast, arms raised. Claire glowing in a scarlet dress, Rachel laughing beside a man I didn't know. Noah smiling, a girl at his side, Hannah maybe. They were all there, all of them, except me. I stared for a long time, not blinking, not breathing. They hadn't just left me out, they had organized around it, booked the room, bought the wine, told stories, raised glasses, and never once wondered who was missing. I turned slowly, heels quiet on the stone. My fingers didn't shake when I reached the entrance. The man at the door looked polished, clipboard in hand. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "But I believe the Ellis family is dining inside tonight." He blinked. Then recognition softened his face. "You must be Margaret." "Brian's mother." "I am." He nodded once, firm. "Of course, please come in." I stepped into the warm hallway. The scent of rosemary and roast lamb wrapped around me like a challenge. Just as I reached the archway to the banquet hall, a voice called out, "Margaret?" I turned, and for the first time in years I saw him, Thomas Reed. Owner of the Orchard, former library assistant, a boy who used to sneak second helpings of George's apple crumble during book fairs. "You haven't changed," he said, voice soft with memory. "Oh," I smiled thinly, "but I have. Apparently so has my family." He grew serious. "They didn't invite you?" "No," I said. "They lied." He paused, looked down the hallway, then offered me his arm. "Shall we?" I took it. Because if they were going to toast 35 years of marriage without the woman who made it all possible, then they could raise a glass to the truth, too. The moment Thomas pushed open the banquet doors, the air changed. Not with a crash, not with drama, but with a hush so sudden, so absolute, it sliced through the room like a razor. Brian's glass stopped mid-air. Rachel's laughter froze. Claire's smile tightened before vanishing altogether. Even the soft clinking of silverware paused, held hostage by my presence. I didn't look at the guests. Not yet. I kept my eyes on my children. Brian was the first to react. He coughed, awkward, then stumbled up from his chair like a man caught sneaking out of his own wedding. "Mom, you're here?" I nodded. "Apparently." He glanced at Claire, who refused to meet my eyes. "You said Claire was sick," I continued, voice steady. "Doctor ordered bed rest, if I recall." Claire blinked. I felt better this morning." "How miraculous," I said, my tone like velvet wrapping steel. Rachel stood next. "Mom, we were going to call—" "No," I interrupted gently. "You weren't." Noah's chair scraped loudly as he rose, startled. "Grandma, I didn't know." "I swear, I thought you were coming." I softened. "I know, sweetheart. This isn't about you." Thomas, ever the gentleman, pulled out an empty chair beside Noah. I sat down slowly, placing my small clutch on the table like a queen laying down her sword. "I didn't come to ruin your evening," I said, folding my hands. "I came because I needed to see it for myself, to be sure this wasn't a miscommunication, that I hadn't been accidentally forgotten, that your father's memory hadn't become inconvenient." No one spoke. A fork clattered somewhere behind me. I reached into my purse and withdrew a white envelope. "Since we're all here, and since I wasn't supposed to be, this seems like as good a time as any." Brian's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" I slid the first paper across the table. "Confirmation of sale of—" "The house on Maplewood is no longer ours. A young family with 2 little girls will be moving in next week." Rachel gasped. Brian's face paled. "Wait, you sold the house?" he whispered. I nodded. "You both wanted me to sign it over for months. But you didn't ask why I hadn't." Then I pulled out the second paper. Donation receipt. The proceeds, $582,000, have been gifted to the Willowbrook Public Library to build a new children's wing in George's name. Claire covered her mouth. Someone at the next table whispered. "And finally," I said, placing the last document down, "my updated will. Whatever modest funds I have left, my jewelry, my photos, my books, they go to Noah, the only one at this table who ever visited me without needing something in return." Noah stared at the envelope like it might burn him. "Grandma, I didn't ask for—" "I know," I said gently. "That's why you're the only one who deserves it." I looked around the table, not with anger, not with spite, but with the crystal clarity of a woman who no longer needed approval to exist. "You wanted a dinner without me," I said. "Now you have one, with the truth as your centerpiece." Silence stretched. Brian opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Rachel looked down, studying her wine as if it might provide an escape. Only Thomas stood steady behind me, hands clasped, a quiet shield. And if this moment made your chest tighten, if you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people you love, then hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to know. Being silent doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it's the calm before the reckoning. Leave a comment below. Have you ever chosen truth over approval? And if not, what would it take? Silence held the room like a second ceiling. I could hear it all. The faint hum of the chandelier above us, the clink of a spoon someone dropped, the quiet rustle of fabric as Claire shifted in her chair. But no one spoke. Not Brian, who still stared at the documents like they were written in another language. Not Rachel, who clutched her wine glass like it was the only thing anchoring her to this table. And not Claire, whose eyes darted everywhere but mine. Only Noah met my gaze. He didn't speak, but his eyes were soft. Wet, afraid, not of me, but of the weight suddenly placed on his shoulders. "Grandma," he whispered, "I didn't know." "I swear." I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "I know, and that's why none of this is for you to carry." Then I turned to the others. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The stillness around me did all the amplification. "I'm not here for revenge," I said, "and I'm not here for pity." I took a breath, no, deep, let it settle before continuing. "I came tonight because I needed to know whether I had become a burden you were all too polite to admit." Rachel opened her mouth, but I lifted my hand before she could speak. "I'm speaking now." She closed it. For years I excused things, the missed calls, the rushed visits, the favors wrapped in kindness but always with strings attached. I told myself you were busy, that I'd understand when I was your age, that maybe it was me asking too much. I looked at Brian. You wanted the house, said it was too much for me, that you'd handle the paperwork, but you didn't offer to move me in. You didn't ask how I felt about letting go of 50 years of memories. Then I turned to Rachel. You brought flowers on your birthday, called me once when your daughter was sick and needed advice, but never stayed long enough to hear the answer. Rachel blinked hard. I kept baking pie, kept waiting for Sunday calls that never came, kept telling myself next week, next holiday, next time. I leaned back slightly, letting the words settle like dust on crystal. But this wasn't forgetfulness. This was orchestration. They didn't deny it because they couldn't, and I didn't stop there. I gave everything I had to this family, I said, my voice soft but cutting. But at some point, my presence became optional. My stories became repetitive. My hugs became tolerated instead of wanted. A waiter entered, saw the tension, and quietly backed out. I exhaled slowly. You thought I wouldn't find out. Or maybe you hoped I would, but too late to do anything about it. Well, here I am. I looked down at the table. There's nothing left to take from me. No property, no checkbook. No silence. Brian finally found his voice. Mom, this isn't how we wanted things to go. No, I said, turning to him. You just didn't want me there. But you also didn't have the courage to say it. He shrank in his chair like a boy caught cheating on a test. Claire looked like she wanted to disappear, and Rachel, my daughter, just stared at her hands. Do you know what hurts most? I asked. No one answered. It's not the dinner, or the lies. It's that for years I thought I had to earn a place at this table, that I had to make myself small to fit into your lives. I stood slowly, but I finally remembered something George used to tell me. Don't sit where you're not welcome. Build your own table. I turned to leave, and that's when I realized I wasn't crying, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I was finally done begging to belong. I didn't expect applause when I walked out of that room, but I didn't expect the silence to feel so freeing. The hallway outside the Orchard's banquet hall was warm with candlelight, soft music echoing from the main dining area. Behind me, conversations resumed, quietly, awkwardly. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed, too loud, too forced. But I didn't turn back. Thomas waited by the entrance, his face calm. Need a ride? He asked. I nodded. He didn't ask questions, didn't comment on what he'd witnessed. Just led me through the front doors with the same quiet dignity George used to carry. Outside, the cab was still waiting, the young driver tapping a rhythm on the steering wheel with his thumb. I already covered the fare, Thomas said. Least I could do. I turned to him. Thank you for everything. He smiled. You did the hard part. I stepped into the cab. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Back home, I slipped off my shoes, hung up my coat, and sat in the kitchen where the pie tin still sat. One slice gone, crumbs scattered like proof that love had existed that morning. I made tea, I washed the dish. I turned off the lights and stood in the dark for a moment, breathing. Not sad, not angry. Just whole. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. No dreams. No replayed conversations, just silence. And for once, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The following week passed like a slow exhale. I boxed up photos, folded linens, labeled memories with blue tape and quiet resolve. Every corner of the house had George in it, his handwriting on the garage shelf, his smell still faint in the cedar-lined closet. I didn't cry. I thanked each room before I left it. Noah came by on moving day. He didn't say much, just carried boxes, fetched tea, and stood beside me as the truck pulled away. "It feels smaller than I imagined," he said, looking at the packed truck. "It's not," I replied. "It's just lighter." The new apartment wasn't fancy, a third-floor walk-up with sun-streaked windows, creaky floors, and a kitchen that made just enough room for two people to stand shoulder to shoulder, but it was mine. I set up a reading nook beside the window, a small table, a chair George would have hated, and a lamp that turned on with a satisfying click. That first morning, I made tea and opened the window. The breeze carried jasmine and children's laughter from the park across the street. I breathed it in. This wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was the one I chose. 3 weeks passed like wind through linen, soft, constant, and full of small sounds I'd never had time to notice before. My new apartment wasn't silent, but it was peaceful. Children laughed in the courtyard, birds nested on the fire escape. On rainy mornings, the pitter-patter on the tin roof above the reading nook became my new favorite soundtrack. I filled the space slowly, a photo of George on the windowsill, a teacup from our honeymoon in Charleston. A blanket Noah gave me last Christmas, nothing fancy, nothing unnecessary. Just things that felt like mine. I started volunteering at the Willowbrook Public Library again, 3 mornings a week in the children's section, the same place George had once read to toddlers in that deep, soothing voice of his. Now, I sat cross-legged with a picture book in my lap, a semicircle of little faces waiting for the next page turn. They didn't care what I owned. They didn't know who hadn't invited me. They just liked that I did the silly voices right. After story time, I helped grade schoolers find their first novels. A boy named Leo asked if dragons were real. A girl named Zoe whispered that she didn't have books at home. I loaned her 3. She brought them back the next week, fingerprints smudged on every page. Sometimes teenagers came in, not to read but to sit. Just sit. I didn't pry. I let them. Sometimes silence is the safest kind of conversation. And on Thursday afternoons, just after 2 p.m., Thomas would stop by. Always with 2 cups of chai in a paper tray, always with a story from the restaurant, a customer who proposed in the soup, a chef who sliced open his glove instead of an onion. He never asked questions I didn't want to answer, and I never explained more than I felt like sharing. Once, he invited me to dinner with his sister. Just dinner. I said yes. No expectations, no strings, just 2 people with too many years behind them, and the quiet courage to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. I still hadn't spoken to Brian. Rachel sent flowers once. I texted thank you. Nothing more. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting. I had nothing left to prove, and nothing I needed back. One afternoon, I looked out the window as the breeze stirred the curtains. A mother and her daughter were reading together on the park bench across the street. I smiled, because for the first time in a long, long time, my life didn't feel borrowed. It felt written in my own hand. If there's one thing I've learned in these past few months, it's this: love isn't something you should have to earn. Not from your children, not from your spouse, not from the people who share your last name. Real love doesn't require proof or permission. It doesn't skip you on invitations. It doesn't come with footnotes or deadlines or terms and conditions. For a long time, I thought being needed was the same as being loved. I baked pies. I kept the house spotless. I offered money I didn't have and time no one asked for. I waited for gratitude like a dog waits at the door, tail wagging, ears perked, hoping. But silence can be cruel, and politeness can be a mask for neglect. It took one lie about one dinner to show me the difference between being included and being honored. I don't regret the years I gave, but I'm done giving from empty hands. Now I give because I choose to, not because I hope to be remembered. And if you, Reading this, have ever felt like you've faded from someone's life? If you've ever wondered if your seat at the table still exists? Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't need to be invited to belong. You get to choose your own table. And when you do, when you build it from honesty, peace, and the quiet company of people who truly see you, you'll realize something powerful. You were never too much. You were simply in the wrong room. If this story touched something in you, maybe a quiet ache, maybe a buried memory, don't just scroll away. Take a breath and take a moment, because someone out there needs to hear your voice, not the polished version, the real one. Tell me in the comments, have you ever chosen yourself after being left out, forgotten, or dismissed? Was there a moment, big or small, when you stopped waiting for a call, an apology, or a seat at someone else's table? Your story could be the reason someone else finally speaks up. It could be the sign they've been waiting for, so share it. Because healing doesn't always begin with answers. Sometimes it begins with recognizing that your silence has a voice and someone else might finally hear it.